All right. Welcome to the My Florida Green podcast. And today we're going to be talking about marijuana being on track for Schedule 3, what kind of implications that may have going forward. And today I'd like to welcome our guest, Jason Castro. Thanks for joining us today, Jason.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So before we get started, Jason, I just want to do a brief introduction. So today we have Jason Castro. He's an Army veteran who served in Operation Iraqi Freedom. He was a New York police officer, has his bachelor's in criminal justice from St. John's University, graduated from Ave Maria Law School in 2015 as a member of the Florida Bar, and in March of 2023 became our corporate in-house counsel here at My Florida Green. Welcome to the podcast, Jason.
It's my pleasure.
All right. So let's kick this off, right? So for those who might not be aware, can you just kind of briefly explain why we're talking about the DEA's recommendation for potentially taking marijuana to Schedule 3?
Absolutely. So right now, marijuana is classified as a Schedule 1 substance under federal law. This means that it is considered to have a high potential of abuse and no accepted medical use and no accepted safety procedures for use under medical supervision. It's in the same category of drugs like LSD and heroin, which makes it subject to the strictest types of regulations and prohibitions. This classification not only affects the patients, but it affects the ability for people to study the substance itself. However, recently the DEA sent a recommendation to reschedule marijuana as a Schedule 3. This is significant. If implemented, it would acknowledge marijuana's accepted medical use and low potential for abuse compared to Schedule 1 substances. This change could greatly reduce restrictions, allowing for medical research and a broader access for patients needing cannabis-based treatments. And it marks a major shift in federal policy that could potentially pave the way for substantial changes on how marijuana is regulated and utilized for medical purposes.
Wow, that's a huge shift from where we've been over the last 100 years.
Absolutely. Marijuana wasn't always prohibited. There is a history deep in American history where it was used for medical purposes, but it's definitely a radical change since the early 1920s.
I couldn't agree more. It's my understanding that back, I believe in the 1800s, it was in the pharmacopoeia, and it was in the pharmacopoeia for doctors until about 1942. So for nearly 100 years, it was in that pharmacopoeia, and then it was ripped out. And looking back, it was known to have one of the highest safety profiles and treated one of the widest range of conditions. So it's interesting how history tends to repeat itself a little bit. Now we're starting to come back to it as a medicinal substance.
Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about how some of the implications here, right? So, if it's classified to Schedule 3, what immediate legal changes do you think it's going to occur on the federal level? Like, how do you think it's going to impact society from that standpoint?
Well, the most immediate change would be that doctors across the country could legally prescribe marijuana. This would open the floodgates for more research, since the red tape surrounding marijuana is right now a little bit overwhelming for doctors. So that would be significantly reduced. Additionally, businesses in the marijuana industry would find it easier to get banking services and tax deductions, which are big hurdles right now. Currently, marijuana businesses often operate on a cash-only basis because banks are hesitant to work with them due to the federal laws and restrictions. The reclassification would alleviate these issues, providing a more stable and financially secure environment for the marijuana industry.
That is something that I never fully understood myself. When you talk about safety, because my understanding is that it's Schedule 1 because the government concern over safety, yet when states started implementing it as, medicinally, and then some states do it recreationally, the fact that they couldn't take banking, take the money to the bank, that's huge safety concern in itself. So I feel like it's a bit of a conundrum that it was ever set up that way.
Currently, the comprehensive federal regulations for growing and distributing and prescribing marijuana right now, there's no path right now under federal law for people to take advantage of all the rights that they would have in operating a business, or the rights that you would have even in accessing medication, because each state has their own different rules that you have to abide by, because overwhelmingly the states have been going against federal policy. They've been operating again in conflict with federal law. And the federal government, really as a result of a memorandum, hasn't been investing money into prosecutions because of the public policy that's swarming throughout the country. But that just because they're not investing in the prosecutions of marijuana does not make it legal. Currently, it's still 100% illegal under federal law until hopefully the reclassification goes forward pretty soon.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you made that clarification because, there's often where we're talking to patients here in Florida, for example, we have a medical program and people will ask, well, can I fly to another state with it? Well, technically you can't because airports are federally regulated and that's a federal space. It's still federally legal. And I know that sometimes people have a hard time with that. Well, what do you mean? It's still in the state of Florida, but it's still a federally regulated place. So I appreciate you making that distinction because that can be a tough one for some folks to wrap their head around.
Absolutely. It's no different than if you were to enter a military installation or a federal government building. The federal law is what will be enforced, and you have to be in compliance with federal law, and marijuana is still prohibited under federal law.
Absolutely. Now, kind of moving into the state of Florida, how do you think the reclassification could affect, medical marijuana patients in Florida, and particularly some of the, the cost of products and maybe access?
Sure. For Florida patients, this could be a complete game changer. More doctors would feel comfortable prescribing marijuana, which means better access for patients. As far as costs could come down as legal production ramps up, and we might even see insurance companies start to cover medical treatments, reducing out-of-pocket expenses for patients. Currently, many patients face high costs because insurance doesn't cover marijuana treatment. Reclassification could make these treatments more affordable, more accessible, leading to overall better health outcomes for those relying on the treatment.
That absolutely would be a game changer. I mean, just seeing it from every day from patients that come in, there's being able to get some of these products covered would just, make it doable for some people because people can't even do it just because of the cost.
Absolutely.
So this could really be huge for them. This is a great shift. Do you think that the reclassification would potentially change the stance on recreational in the state of Florida?
Well, it might lead to more conversations. Let me just make clear, I do not support recreational marijuana. So I just want to caveat that. But reclassifying marijuana for medical purposes could lead to broader acceptance of its medical benefits. But recreational use is a different story. Federal law still prohibits recreational use. And rescheduling it as a Schedule 3 wouldn't change that. And changing it would require to overcome significant legal hurdles that a lot of people are unaware of. Recreational marijuana legalization at a federal level faces not only a divided Congress that would be required, that Congress would have to pass legislation to make this happen, but also it would have to be in compliance with international treaties. There are several international treaties where we have on an international level, we have agreed to criminalize the cannabis plant. Right now, with rescheduling it as a Schedule 3, they're saying that we're doing this for medical purposes, but it's still criminalized for recreational purposes, absent some type of international cooperation to overcome the international treaties. And where a lot of people don't realize that if the United States at a federal level was to go forward with decriminalizing marijuana on a recreational level, that could subject the United States to significant sanctions from the United Nations, and it could cause it could cause significant damage to our credibility as far as abiding by the treaties that we have signed.
I can tell you a lot of people are not going to know about that. That's something, when we talked previously, I was kind of blown away. I was like, wow, I can't believe that those even existed. And that makes sense that it would be. There's a lot more moving pieces to this, I think, than a lot of people might give this credit for. So, and something else that you mentioned that I'm really looking forward to personally is potentially lifting the stigma around marijuana, because, I think for so many years it's been, we've been undergone a level of propaganda, right? That this is the devil's lettuce. It's bad. It's something that you shouldn't do. But at the end of the day, I mean, this is a plant that has been around for thousands of years. It's been used for many different purposes, from textiles to medicinal purposes. And, when you know more about the plant, you can get so much out of it. It can really help with so many different conditions. So that to me is really exciting because, I see people come in and they're getting massive relief from this plant that they were not getting from traditional synthetic pharmaceuticals. And this is just really inspiring because this could really open people's eyes and open the doors for many people to get relief that they never had. And that's a better quality of life. And let me tell you, when people get a better quality of life, we're happier. It creates a better world. So all around, this could be great things. And this is the right way to do it, in my opinion.
I absolutely agree.
So let's talk a little bit about research, right? Because I just mentioned that the plant has been around for thousands of years. There's lots of, archaeological data. There's a lot of international studies that's been a bit hindered, it being Schedule 1 in the United States. And I know you mentioned it earlier, but just can you expand a little bit on what this could do for clinical studies and what it could do to help kind of really help doctors understand this better?
Currently, there's been a lot of information that was gathered, but that information was gathered in violation of federal law. How the states have passed laws under state law, they implemented these vertical integration models to try to create medical marijuana treatment under state law. But in order for you to have medical marijuana treatment at a federal level, you would need some type of substance that has passed FDA clearance. Okay, that requires certain procedures. So that we studied this plant that they submit to the FDA, and that is a long, lengthy process. So even if it was rescheduled today, there's not going to be anything on the market for a while because these studies have to go forward procedurally. Yes, we may know the science is there. We already have enough. We are already all convinced, but the process of passing an FDA-approved drug is still there, meaning that, and up to this point, you couldn't have the appropriate studies done because with the federal prohibition, you couldn't then you have universities out there that are subject to federal grants and all these other all this other red tape. They were prevented from putting formal studies out there that the federal government could rely on to pass a product immediately upon rescheduling. That's not the way it's going to work. We're still going to have to wait until there's something on the market before you're going to be able to go to your to find something that's going to have a federal stamp on it.
So when you're saying that it needs that federal stamp, so how do you think that this is going to change the way doctors prescribe or recommend cannabis or marijuana in Florida? Do you think that's going to be any different in Florida? Because you're talking about difference between state and federal. How do you think
I think it's going to be different nationally. If you really think about it, once it's rescheduled as a Schedule 3 substance, that could open up its availability to integrate into several different forms of treatment. So currently right now, you see a doctor, you get a recommendation, you go to dispensary, you get your products. But once it's rescheduled as a Schedule 3, you could sit down with a doctor and maybe get actual physical therapy and integrate it into the physical therapy. You could maybe integrate it into different treatments in ways that we could never do before because doctors were operating on a very, very narrow exception where they were recommending marijuana rather than prescribing it.
That's a good point, and that's the way the program is set up. So I think it's a really great point to make. Now, can we talk hypothetical for a second here? So hypothetically, say Schedule 3 happens tomorrow, right? And now we need to have the studies, the clinical studies kind of catch up. Any idea on how long that may take for the clinical studies to kind of happen, for the FDA to get on board, and for this all to kind of, for products to be available from prescriptions from doctors?
Well, from my research, everything would appear that under traditional circumstances, that's like about a 2-year process minimum. However, I'm not sure how the federal government is going to treat this, if they may treat it differently because of the overwhelming amount of information that has come in from states that have legalized medical marijuana throughout the country that was cited in the DEA's recommendation, where they did a great job of consolidating the information, making it clear that marijuana serves a very recognizable medical purpose.
Gotcha. Now, talking about some of the, the economic and business, impacts to this and some of the legal impacts to that, what kind of opportunities or even challenges do you think might arise for businesses involved in the cultivation and the distribution and sale of marijuana nationally?
Well, a lot of states have these vertical integrated models where you cannot, where marijuana for medical purposes aren't supposed to be crossing state lines. Once you cross state lines, you're talking about it's interstate commerce. That is federal regulation. That is federal domain. Once it's rescheduled, it's going to be interesting to see how, on a national level, if we're going to be seeing changes in the market, because for the first time, we're not going to be 100% reliant on Florida growers, because we're going to have access to the entire country to get products from all over. And even then, it's going to be even further interesting to see if at some point they enter regulations to allow marijuana products in from other countries.
Okay. Now, how do you think this is going to affect law enforcement and the criminal justice system regarding this change in the reclassification?
So as far as law enforcement is concerned, law enforcement practices could shift their focus less on marijuana-related offenses, particularly those involving medical use. This could lead to a reduction in arrests, prosecutions, and general waste of time when it comes down to marijuana possession, especially for medical purposes. Now, criminal policies might also evolve to prioritize treatment and education over incarceration for marijuana-related offenses, and that's what I really hope the criminal justice system will be more drawn to, is to treat marijuana violations, or rather, prosecute marijuana violations by having the defendant go through education and maybe even treatment rather than any type of incarceration or probation.
Yeah, that is a huge shift that we're long overdue for.
Absolutely.
Long overdue. Now, kind of zooming out a little bit, right? Just kind of taking a broader perspective on this. From a legal perspective, what do you see as some of the biggest benefits and the biggest opportunities of reclassifying to Schedule 3?
Well, the biggest benefits would include the increased access for medical marijuana patients and the more opportunities for research and potential economic growth. I can anticipate that the reclassification would draw more business into medical marijuana-friendly states, and see a lot of innovation within the marijuana industry and different services that will potentially incorporate people's treatment in line with their prescription. Some drawbacks could include the implementation of new regulations that right now are a mystery. We don't know what these regulations are going to be like yet. And when in the field, we're all very eager to see what's going to happen so we go through there. But it's going to be difficult with so many different states and so many different policies right now to create a uniform system throughout the country. That's going to take a while probably before it gets organized.
So just thinking about this, right? Like, say this happens, okay? And there's a number of things that could happen. We can get a lot more clinical data on it. Stigmas may start to change and really see this as the wonderful plant that it is and healing plant that it is. So should all of that happen, right? Do you see further efforts to declassify marijuana in the future?
I see further conversations, further efforts to draw attention to try to reclassify it as a recreational substance. I'm not saying it's impossible, because we have come a long way already just in the context of medical marijuana. However, I don't see it happening anytime in the near future, primarily because you have these treaties, these international treaties that would require international cooperation. Now, we're all connected in today's day and age through the internet, through social media. So I'm not going to say it's impossible. And I'm sure that there's a lot of other advocates for medical marijuana and recreational marijuana in other countries who don't understand why their governments aren't making efforts to reschedule it. It's because I happen to think personally that there's a lot of people in a variety of countries that are in the same boat as us, where unless someone starts that international effort, it's never going to happen.
That's true. And I noticed, the United States tends to be a bit of a trendsetter when it comes to things like that. So, the future is uncertain, but it's going to be very interesting. So let's talk legal precedents, right? Like, so Are there any specific cases that you think would be relevant, that'll be particularly relevant as we move forward towards this reclassification?
Absolutely. The primary case that comes to mind is Gonzalez v. Wright, which held that the federal government has the authority to regulate marijuana even in states where it's legal. This would have to be revisited. Additionally, there's state level cases and challenges to restrictive laws that might also become more relevant as federal policies evolve. Additionally, you might see new legal challenges emerge as the landscape changes, pushing the courts to address the conflict between state and federal laws.
Okay. Now, given the DEA's comprehensive review that they've done, what are some of the specific points that they highlighted in their decision to recommend marijuana going Schedule 3?
I think one of the biggest things that they were addressing was its low risk for abuse and for addiction, and that was one of the main things that they were harping on, is that everything that they've shown that it shouldn't be in the same classification as other Schedule 1 narcotics. When you're when you're thinking about anabolic steroids and certain barbiturates, it doesn't come with the same immediate stigma or anything. And that's where they're trying to do with marijuana. They're trying to say, should be looking at this as a Schedule 1 narcotic like LSD and heroin. This should be treated in the same category as anabolic steroids, some barbiturates, Schedule 3 substances with a low risk of abuse, low risk for dependence.
I'm so glad that point was made because, when we look at where we're at today, I mean, we're in the middle, let's face it, we're in the middle of an opioid epidemic, and it's a lot of it, that I believe I read a stat the other day, 45 people per hour die every day from prescription overdoses. I mean, that's, and then we're looking at a plant here that is much safer than a lot of that, at least on the surface. And I know there's a lot of clinical studies that need to go through, but so yeah, I'm so glad that was the stance that was taken, because that is more closely aligned with the reality that I'm seeing every day. So that is fantastic. Now, just kind of talk, because I know there's we've talked a bit about recreational and the fact that that's likely not going to be on the horizon anytime soon. But, should it be part of the conversation as we move forward in this, right? What are some of the things that lawmakers should really consider in that conversation?
What they really should consider in that conversation is the integrity of our Constitution. The Constitution of the United States makes it clear that supremacy law applies. The federal law takes precedent over state law. There are very few narrow exceptions, but recreational marijuana doesn't fall into those exceptions. If the federal government keeps ignoring the recreational use that's going on in the country, they're creating a very, very, very dangerous precedent, because right now they're going to I believe that it runs the risk of a constitutional crisis where states are going to do whatever they want. That uniformity that makes our country great is what we call interstate commerce. There has to be uniform regulations across the nation in order for our commerce system to work, so we can all prosper as one. When states go and do their own thing, that places significant burdens on out-of-state businesses trying to comply with that state law. It may place additional burdens on in-state businesses that they would not have to deal with if they were an out-of-state business. And that's why we need the federal government to step in, reschedule it as the marijuana as a Schedule 3, and really create a uniform procedure out there where it could rectify the potential damage that was caused by ignoring the conflict of law between state and federal law, as they've been doing for quite some time.
That's true. That's a really good point. I think, and again, that just goes into the nuance between state and federal, because a lot of people have a hard time understanding, why is it legal in my state, but I can't take it on an airplane, and all those nuances. So, I appreciate really helping kind of clarify a lot of that. So as we start to wrap up, do you have any other final thoughts regarding this reclassification and some things that you think people should know about it?
I think that everyone needs to be patient right now, because we're about to make some huge strides for medical marijuana patients, for the industry. And we're not sure exactly how these federal regulations are going to be presented to us just yet. But this is a time for celebration for people within the industry. This is what we've been asking for a very long time. So we're gonna have to roll with the punches and just kind of help bring the industry into this new era. Because there's going to be a time that we're going to always reflect on where it's going to be like, before this point, it was federally illegal. Until this, now this is a new generation, new regulations, new forms of businesses could be brought up throughout the country. This is a great time for the medical marijuana industry.
I feel like it's such a great time for our space and also for people to see, to have another avenue to get relief. I mean, it breaks my heart to see, I see it almost every day, people will come in and they're having a hard time because the synthetic pharmaceuticals either are not working, they're creating side effects that are creating more pills that they have to take, and they don't feel good, and then they come in here, get certified, we give them a great education, help them understand what this plant actually does versus the stigma. And we see them come back in 7 months and thousands of patients are so much better off. And I see the potential for so many other people out there. And it's inspiring for me. And I know we can do we are doing some great things out there. And I want to thank you so much for joining us today and helping break some of this down. Because I know this is complicated for many people. So I really appreciate your time today.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right. And as we wrap, I just want to remind everyone, like, comment, share, tell your friends about us, because we are going to continue bringing education and helping us understand this space.